The Italian-American organizations reached out to the ADL, but the ADL seems not to have, it refused to endorse the anti-Shark Tale stuff and seems to have been feeding information back to Spielberg, actually, in the middle of this war that I witnessed, because I would sit in, they asked me to sit in on their, the teleconferences, like the Sons of Italy, National Italian-American Foundation, and UNICO. Fascinating for a historian to observe this, this stuff as it happened. And then Joe Piscopo, he hasn't gone back to playing the Jersey guy from Saturday Night Live. He had promised to make a movie about Bloomfield Avenue from Newark out to the suburbs, sort of like you know, from Taylor Street out to Stone Park, let's say. But that movie was never filmed. And so, but
why wasn't the movie filmed?
What?
They didn't have money, funding, or
he didn't find the funding. It's promoting positive images is hard. It takes a lot of energy. I think one of the most eloquent voices in the film, in the book, is that of Linda Ann Lo Schiavo, the lady wearing the funny hat with the high, shrill voice, saying it's the community's fault. She's a writer, and she did this wonderful study of the grants that different ethnic groups give their writers in this country. And there are big grants for promoting promising young writers in the Jewish community, in the Latino community, and in the African American community. For playwrights to get started, for novelists, short stories. And the Italian community hasn't done anything like what these other communities have done. And they've done it quite consciously as a way of promoting talent and images for their ethnic groups.
The Italians have been too busy organizing dinner dances. La bella figura.
But now Fred talking about universities, Dominic talking about maybe doing a chair here in Chicago in Italian studies or Italian American studies. One of the really positive things of the last 10 years has been Italian American organizations seeing that institutions of higher learning offer a way of locking in for the future through these endowments that are perpetual. As long as the institution exists, these endowments exist.
Close to immortality as we're going to get.
And you can guarantee that there will always be a chair in Italian American Studies at, let's say, Loyola Chicago, just as there is now there's a chair in Italian Studies at Seaton Hall University, and Fred created, helped raise the money for a chair in Italian American Studies at SUNY Stony Brook, and those chairs will be there forever. And it's in the same way that there was a chair established in Christian theology at the University of Oxford in 1490 that still exists. And it's a wonderful strategy for ensuring that the future will still pay attention to these studies that concern us.
Yeah,
that are of real importance.
Immortality for $1 million. Cheap price.
Can I jump in? Will you turn this around so I can see the people? I mean, the flag is beautiful. But,
oh, you're not seeing yourself?
No, I see myself. That's the problem. There we go. There we go. I just want to bring in a couple of things that just to add on to what Bill said, and that is one of the reasons why the Italian government acted the way it did in the De Niro situation and so on is because the Italian educational system also has an anti-Italian Americanism to it. All the Italians who came to the United States to study American history, almost every single major professor of American studies got a PhD or studied or taught in the United States. And when they learned the history of the United States, and they typically learned it at the higher levels, Italian Americans were never mentioned, or if they were, it was about immigration and an organized crime and nothing in between. And so what happens is there becomes the anti-Italianism that we've documented in American culture, which makes its way into American universities, becomes anti-Italian Americanism in Italy, so that the professors there, when they're teaching American studies, they don't teach their own Italian students about the mass immigration that came to the United States. And not only that, but not for what those people did. If you look at most of the films that Italians have created about immigration to the United States, and there's very few, none of them deal with life after the people get out of Ellis Island. They all stop at Ellis Island. And so that history that we have begun to preserve needs to be transported to Italy. This year, when I was involved at the Center for American Studies, I gave a talk about anti-Italianism in American Studies, and I gave a talk about anti-Italian Americanism in Italian Studies, American Studies in Italy. And the professors were very upset that I would make them look bad. Another one of these things about figura. And so what you have happening in Italy is a lot of young Italians who can't get jobs in Italy are coming to the United States now, and they're going to get PhDs. And I just, while I have to admit I was multitasking, a student sent me an email with her personal statement to get into the University of Pennsylvania. And she's going to present a project on Italian-American literature at the University of Pennsylvania. These things are beginning to happen. And this is, it may trickle down, but I think what we need to do is make everything rise up. A program in Italian-American, why am I here? Why am I not in that room tonight? Because I came to where Italian-American Studies was accepted, where it's been developed out on the East Coast. I mean, I hated New York my whole life. It's taken me 13 years to like New York. I probably never will love it. But I could not create Italian-American Studies. Dominic tried very hard in his tenure to create, and we all did our best. I was teaching at Columbia College. I was teaching a course in Italian-American Studies. But what needs to happen is exactly what Bill was saying. These endowed professorships are a good start. Italian-Americans are very good about giving scholarships to students. But once those students go to college, it's almost as if they don't see themselves reflected in the curriculum. They don't see their history. So it's very easy to not identify with being Italian-American, especially when the mass media images are so negative, especially when the professors are so ignorant about Italian-American culture, and so they stop. I mean, this happened to me back in the 1980s when I was at the University of Chicago. They would not allow me to do a dissertation on Italian-American writers. Now I'm thankful to say that most of my books, and most of the books of a lot of other scholars, is in the Regenstein Library. And when I went into the Regenstein Library, I stumbled on Italian-American literature by accident. I was researching Walt Whitman, and I walked down one of the rows of the stacks, and I saw this book kind of blaring out at me, Italian-American novel. I said, "What's this?" I sat down and read the whole book inside the stack, and I realized I needed to change this. And it's happened very small in my life. I mean, I didn't imagine there would be this thing called Italian-American Studies. I didn't even imagine that there would be this thing called a professorship of Italian-American Studies. So it's the work that people like Bill and Dominic and I have done, yes, but without the community support, it means absolutely nothing. And I think one of the ways you can support it is buying the book and putting it in the hands of somebody you think would benefit by it. Most of the books that I've enjoyed in my life are books that I found on my own. Whenever people give me books, I think, but I'm guilty enough that I end up reading it. My godfather was the first to give me a book, my confirmation godfather in my family, and it was Luigi Barzini's The Italians. And I did not read that book for 10 years. Had I read it back when I was 14 or 12 or 13 years old when you make your confirmation, things might have been different. But when I read it, it was like, oh my God, my people matter. My people form a part of culture. And when you don't see yourself reflected in the cultural mirror of what you study, you don't think you exist. You don't see yourself. And as I tell people, the only figurative character that does not see its own reflection is a vampire. And what does a vampire do? It sucks off the blood of other people. And that's what Italian Americans have pretty much done. When they leave the family, which is where most of our identity came from and comes from, the idea is to try to be like somebody else. And a lot of times, try to be like those Italian Americans who get the attention. So I think your job is to take this book, get your library. I mean, this is another thing Italian Americans don't understand, is that they don't have to put all the money in themselves. There's public institutions that are chartered and paid for by your taxes to house culture, whether it's paintings, exhibits, books, recordings, and so on. And you can go to your libraries and say, hey, order this book. And all those things matter, because someday another kid will walk into the library and say, oh, I didn't know this existed, and we will begin to build from there. I think I'll stop there, and we could, I'd like to hear questions from the audience. I don't know.
Thanks a million, Fred. I wanted to do a little bit on my own. I've got about 5 minutes of life with Luigi. And then we'll go to, okay, can you see me now, Fred?
Yeah.
The thing that I had to contribute to this anti-Italianism was, in my mind, not anti-Italianism at all. It was the exception that proves the rule. When I was a little boy in Chicago Heights, about maybe 8 years old, I'd listen to the radio. And the biggest hit, one of the biggest hits on the radio in Chicago and throughout the country on CBS radio was Life with Luigi. The story of, and I'll play a little bit of it for you in a minute. But it lasted for about 5 years at the top of the charts. And about 1952-53, television came in, and they had, I think, a season of TV with Life with Luigi, starring J. Carrol Naish, but it didn't continue. There were a lot of different things going on. One was the Red Scare. Some of the writers were a little bit lefty in there, but to my mind they were all very patriotic, and they portrayed, and Life with Luigi is a little bit like Amos and Andy. You didn't know whether the audience was laughing at or with the main character, Luigi. But the thing is clear, and you know, I listened to this every night, every week for 3 or 4 years, and I was living in a situation where we had cousins who were coming from Italy at about that time, and they were running into some of the same problems that the little immigrant from Italy who lived in Chicago on Halsted Street, Luigi was going through those same things, buying insurance, buying a car, going to night school. All those things were happening to people in my family. So I really identified with it. And the writers, Cy Howard was, he did My Friend Irma, and if you recognize My Friend Irma, you're of an age, and you probably have a Medicare card in your pocket. It was very funny, and it was very uplifting. Luigi was a very noble guy. He was a very patriotic guy. I can't say the same for his friend, who got him into all sorts of trouble, and he was trying to marry off Luigi to his fat daughter Rosa, and that was a constant gag. And in preparation for making my contribution to anti-Italianism, I listened to about 50 hours of Life with Luigi's stuff, and you could get it on the internet in MP3 format, and I'm going to play a little bit of that for you in a minute. But it was sort of stylized. Luigi would be writing a letter back to his mother, and the music was "O Marie, O Marie," and then Luigi said, "Dear Mamma," and And it would go on for, he'd start explaining something about America and how strange it was, and you know, he'd get the meanings of the words a little bit wrong. And then he'd go off to night school with Miss, what's her name, and Luigi was in love with her. And he had a whole bunch of, his classmates were from all different ethnic groups, and they sometimes worked with him to help him solve his problem, but his nemesis was always Luigi and Pasquale, I think. Pasquale was his landlord and sort of his boss, who wanted him to marry Rosa. Pasquale would always give him some bad advice, or give him some advice that would make him do things so he'd end up in Rosa's arms or whatever, or offer to solve his problem if Luigi would only marry Rosa. And there were a lot of fat jokes there. It was the 1940s and early 1950s, a kind of simplistic and innocence to it, and a lot of very corny jokes in it, and the sponsors were there quite a bit. They entered into the story, but there's some things. Frank Sinatra was on Life with Luigi, and this was a time when Frank Sinatra's career was on the downswing, and he was getting into a new TV series, and he wanted to promote it, so he went on Luigi. Later on, in an interview, he said he hated Life with Luigi because they were always speaking in broken English and all that, making Italians look bad. But you know, their broken English was perfect. They were, and J. Carrol Naish was not an Italian, but he was an actor, and that's what actors do. They act like people, like real people. And so this was, there were some Italians who saw this and were enraged because they didn't like to hear broken English. And Fred did this. Fred had this broken English column.
Mustache Pete.
Mustache Pete in the Franoi. And I can remember people saying, "Did you read that? You did that? You know, it makes us look so bad and so stupid that we can't speak English." But this is the way they talk. So, this is Mustache Pete is dead. You can get it on Amazon.
Amazon.com.
Yeah. And so, I think one of the factors in the final decline of Life with Luigi was that Italian Americans objected to it. Some Italian Americans objected to it. They didn't have the sense of humor that a 10-year-old boy in Chicago Heights had, or an appreciation. And you know what? This was the only time when I could turn the radio on and see and hear people like the people that I lived with, like my family. And, you know, Ozzie and Harriet were the alternatives. And so, and I loved it. I loved it. Anyhow, let me see if I can find, I'm just taking something at random. Fred, get out of there.
All right, whatever you want. I'm here. I'll listen.
Okay,
By the way, have you ever found those TV things, TV series at all on video?
Like with Luigi, we have one or two. They are not very good. Let's see, micro. Oh, I have to go to here. I know what it is. My computer. Okay.
Just chase the camera.
I'm just going to take one at random.
invite you to enjoy Life. Life with Luigi, a new comedy show created by Cy Howard and starring that celebrated actor, Mr. J. Carroll Nash, with Alan Reed as Pasquale. A year ago, when Luigi Basco left Italy to start his new life in America, he promised his mother that he would write and tell her about his adventures. So now let's read Luigi's letter as he writes to Mama Basco in Italy.
Dear Mamma Mia, America is a land with a very high standard of living. Everybody saves money so he can buy a refrigerator, a washing machine, a dishwasher, and a vacuum cleaner. Seems like everybody here has got these things. People who can afford it, they buy it. People who cannot afford it, they go on a quiz program. Another big American thing, everybody has got a car. They got all kinds of here. There's sedans, the trailers, the trucks, and America is so rich that they even got a car for chickens. That's called a coop. A car is a wonderful thing. You remember, Mamma Mia, in the older country during the war, how American boys had taken me for driving in the car? Well, it wasn't exactly a car, it was something like a cement mixer, and I used to call it a Jeep. Mamma Mia, how that car is a shake. Remember once how we go for a ride? Me and Uncle Pietro and his goat. And when we come back, I'm losing my watch. Uncle Pietro's loses his teeth. And the goat is refused to give him milk for 3 days. Since that time, I'm always the one to own my own car. And after 1 year, I must have $100, and now I'm going to make my dream come true. Of course, with $100, I'm not going to afford the new 1949 car. I'm going to have to be satisfied with a 48. But right now is the time for my night school class, so I'm going to go and ask my teacher, Miss Spaulding, for advice about buying a car.
All right, class, all right, let's come to attention. I'll call the roll. Mr. Basco?
Present.
Mr. Harwood?
Present.
Mr. Olson?
Present.
Mr. Schultz?
Absent.
Mr. Schultz, you're present. Why do you say absent?
I just want to create a sensation. Oh, thank you, fellow boobers. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Schultz, you can stop bowing. Now, class, our lesson... Oh, yes, Mr. Basco, what is it?
Well, Miss Spaulding, today is a big day in my life. And I'm like so much if the classes are helping me.
Certainly, Mr. Basco, what is it?
Well, today I'm going to buy my own car.
A car? Oh, Luigi, it's a big shot. A big shot in an explosion.
Class, please. Mr. Basco, why don't you wait till after the bell? I'm sure one of your classmates can help you in the selection of a car. Now, class, our lesson for today is spelling. And we are going to study words which contain letters that we don't pronounce. Now, Mr. Basco, will you volunteer to spell the word knife?
Knife. K-N-I-F. The E is silent.
Not exactly. Mr. Schultz, will you try?
I try, but I don't give a guarantee. Knife. B.
Just a moment, Mr. Schultz. There is no B in knife.
Okay, so it goes. And as you can see, there are files for about 20 or 30 on this disc alone, and then there are others. I told you, there were some message programs. Luigi was in charge at one time in doing a play. And he wanted to do the play about the American Revolution. He wanted to have George Washington in it. But there was a black guy, a Negro they called him, in 1949. And he insisted on casting him as, I can't remember what the name of there was a black hero in the Boston Massacre or something.
Marcus Garvey?
Marcus Garvey?
Christmas addicts.
Christmas addicts, yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah,
There are high schools in various places, right?
okay, Christmas addicts. And yeah, he stood up to pressure. You know, do you really know what you're doing, and is this the right thing? And then, of course, it worked out perfectly. And there were some other times when the moral of the half-hour show was to buy bonds or to support NATO or some other positive and patriotic thing. And my view on this is that millions and millions of Americans were listening to Life with Luigi. There were four choices you had. People listened to the radio every night. This was one of the top shows over a 4 or 5 year period. And this went into people's homes, and it gave them an image of Italian Americans. Now, if you look at the writing and you really listen, pay attention to the story and what the moral of the story is, it was always very positive. Luigi is a good guy. He talks funny. He sometimes gets sidetracked by Pasquale, but he's got a heart of gold, and he's pretty smart, and in the end, things always go his way. And he's very, very patriotic. So this was the Italian-American image that was portrayed by Life with Luigi. And this comes at an interesting time, too, in our history, because this is after World War II, when 1 million of the soldiers who served in the armed forces of the 15 million in World War II were Italian American. And if Chicago Heights is any indication, these soldiers, like any other soldiers, got a lot of honor, publicity, their pictures in the paper, the fallen were depicted as great heroes, and so respect for Italian Americans became stronger as a result of the war, and I think on the Luigi level it became strong as well. After Luigi, well, you wait for 20 years and you got The Godfather and then The Sopranos and all that. But this was a part of the mix. And also another part of the mix of the 1950s was that group of Italian Americans who were musicals and movie stars who became popular. My favorite is Rosemary Clooney, but you may have your favorite as well. And what's his name? Had this book on the Italian music. What's the name of it? Fred, you read all the books.
Yes, Mark
Rotella?
Rotella.
That's right.
Rotella.
But Mark Rotella has, what's the name of it? The Italian?
Amore.
Amore, yeah. About the Italian trend. I'll just call it the Italian trend in the 1950s when I was very impressionable, becoming a teenager and even going off to college. And well, the first thing that happened when I went to college is my Jewish roommate sang all the words to Volare in Italian to me. So I thought, well, we've arrived. He still didn't want to eat my dried sausage that I brought from home. So anyhow, that's sort of counter to the trend, and Bill can tell you more about the other chapters that are in the book. And if there's interest, I'd like to do a whole evening of Life with Luigi sometime. If, you know, I don't know, do you have some reaction to it? Is it too corny? Is it too dated?
No, not at all. Oh, no.
No, it's a good idea.
briefly, there were some copies. There are some copies available for $20. There's also a discount flyer for the book. There's a. I don't want to go chapter by chapter because it becomes a long summary, and we really need some questions from the audience. Let me just put a final plug, though, for one of the chapters that hasn't been mentioned in the book, and it's an issue that often comes up that hasn't been discussed, except Fred made one mention of the Jersey Shore. And that is the final chapter. It's a magnificent 40-page essay by Donald Tricarico that describes where the image of the teen, early 20s Guido comes from in American popular culture. And he's an anthropologist, Long Island, Queens-based, who went around interviewing Italian-American youngsters about why they did what they did, which clubs they went to. He recorded conversations from chat rooms, and it's a fascinating portrait of the students that I teach, the students that Fred teaches, and I'm sure there are kids like this in Chicago. It explains their relationship and feelings about being Italian in modern day America, and just for that essay alone, the volume is worth the price. So maybe we should turn things over for questions at this point. On anything, it's wide open because we've covered so many topics. Yes?
Going back to the brigands and that part of the century and how they're portrayed, even before the Italians got here in large numbers, how did religion play into that? Because, you know, my own WASP stereotype is the WASP against the Catholic thing.
Yeah, how did the religion fit in? This is part of one of the really interesting things. There's a myth in the Italian community, which is that everybody suffered when they got here, then World War II came along, and everybody was brought into American society, except for the blacks who had to wait a while, and the Japanese who suffered during the war. But otherwise, everybody was brought together by World War II. But basically, they suffered the same way, so why do we need to look back at those things? In fact, the Italians who got here found that the Catholic Church was already dominated by the Irish and the Germans, and they were in a way kept out for about 20 years. And in New Jersey, I found terrific instances of Catholic priests documenting how the Italians coming into Jersey City were going en masse to Methodist and Episcopalian churches. So I guess to go back to my original point, is that the Italians had a different history. And all these ethnic groups have different histories that need to be studied on their own, rather than subscribing to the myth that it was the same for everybody. They just came with the people coming first being hard on the people who came next, who were hard on the people who came next. And religion offers a marvelous avenue for seeing the differences among these groups.
And of course, different Italians had different experiences. The experience in California, the California Italians, was quite different from that of the New York or Chicago Italians. And Italians in New Orleans were mainly Sicilian, had a different experience from those in Chicago, and etc. So, and there were not, although we say Italians came here for pane e lavoro, some of them came as political exiles. They were pushed out of Italy for whatever reason. Some came for mere adventure. So it's multi-layered, and it's hard to create a stereotype. All Italian Americans did this, or all Italian Americans did that. And also, it made a difference where you live. If you lived in a neighborhood that was 90% Italian, that was one thing. If you were in Des Moines, Iowa, and your family was the only Italian family in town, that was another experience. And there are some Italian Jews, and there are Italian Waldensians, or Protestants, who had different experiences as well.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, it's been really great, and there's a lot of questions I could ask, but I want to ask something that I've thought about a lot, which is why are organizations in the Italian-American community less strong, less unified, less committed to advancing, you know, the interests of Italian-Americans? And I want to ask specifically anyone here if you think that it's partly another legacy of the Southern Italian experience, which is that sort of, if you will, that politics is, that people are suspicious of politics, people are suspicious of, you know, organizing in any way that's political. Do you think that has something to do with it, or is there some other, do you have some other opinion about that?
Who wants to, Fred will jump into anything.
I have an opinion on everything. I'll just be brief. I think a lot of times people dismiss the inability for Italian Americans to organize on the fact that Italians can organize. It's impossible. They can't organize in Italy, so how can you expect them to organize here? But I think a lot of it has to do with simple acknowledgement of what happened. And first of all, an understanding of what happened, and secondly, acknowledgement of that. And third, the ability to figure out what can we do positively to advance our interests. We didn't have a Holocaust. We didn't have slavery to unite us. Most of what you identify with being Italian American today comes from a past that no longer exists. And most Italian American organizations have tried in many ways to preserve that past as it was, and you can't change anything. And that's what has alienated and isolated the youth. You know, even if they change the music at their dinner dances, it's too late to capture the youth because they don't identify with the broken English that I grew up with. You know, the neighborhood swarming with Italians where, you know, I thought everybody ate spaghetti on Sundays, and when I left my neighborhood, I was shocked that people didn't. And so I think with the organizations have always been built and run by the people who have the time to build and run organizations, which meant back in the 1920s, that was the elite. Doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and so on. And some of them did very valuable things. The White Hand Society, for example, going against the mafia. That's a story that just recently came out. And it's one of the few anti-mafia stories you have in the United States. I mean, typically, in Italy, people die fighting against the mafia. And in America, most people spent more time fighting the mafia on TV than they ever did the mafia in reality. So I think a lot of times this organization problem that we have is because of how these people perceive and try to unify Italian Americans by creating this common experience and not getting at what Dominic just said, the multi-layered aspect, which would include everybody. I don't know how many of you belong to these organizations. I belong to all of them because it's an occupational necessity for me. And I'm probably the person most critical of all those organizations. I once said, let's put a ban on college scholarships for 1 year, take that money and invest it into education by creating programs. And I was kind of booed off the stage. We have to give our kids college scholarships and so on. So I think part of that has to do with the people who began the organizations and how they've maintained it and how they preserved this sense of this is Italian American, this is not. And one of the things that always happens, I shouldn't say always, but might always happen when Italian Americans get together is that when an Italian from Italy walks into the room, they begin to get very reticent about, you know, because Italian Americans thought of themselves first as Italian in the United States. I mean, I think the earliest that I can find the word Italian American in any kind of American material is like in the 1880s. Up until then, they were always called Italians or our Italians or Italians in America. And so most Italian Americans, when they're asked what they are, they may identify as Italian, not Italian American. And when you go to Italy, I mean, I thought I was Italian. I went to Italy, I realized, oh my God, I'm American. I'm not like these people. So I think you're right in the sense that there is this sense, but it's also who do these groups represent, and do they represent the masses? I mean, we had some Chicago's probably the city, and Dominic could probably comment more on this, that has had the least amount of luck organizing politically. I mean, if you look at all our suburbs, they're all Italian mayors in the suburbs. But in the city of Chicago, we have never had an Italian-American mayor, never. And I once did an interview with Vito Marzullo, probably the first Italian-American to achieve city status politics, and he was basically a hack for Daley. Whatever Daley wanted, he made sure that happened. And he didn't really do a lot to unite the Italian-Americans. Plus, you have to understand, uniting Italian-Americans at a time when it wasn't really cool to be Italian-American during World War II was crucial, because that's the time when a lot of these political organizations started expanding and trying to get other ethnic groups. And the Italians could not come out and say, well, we are Italian, we have these issues, because America was at war with them. So it's a great question. I think it needs to be continued to be asked, and I think you need to ask it to the organizations.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a few things too on that. Italians have, they're divided regionally. And the most recent Italian immigrants, the post-World War II immigrants in Chicago especially, are the most active. And they're the most active through their regional organizations. The Sicilian group, the Calabrese group, the Pugliese group are all very strong, and they're all focused on the one thing. Now, it was kind of a Christmas miracle in early December that we got the Pugliese and the Calabrese and the Italian American Executives of Transportation to cooperate together in a Christmas Sunday Christmas celebration. So, that's something that we have to work against. People feel automatically excluded if it's being sponsored by a regional group that they're not a part of. Also, Italian fascism is the legacy of fascism is a problem. There was a strong left-wing socialist movement among Italians into the 1930s in Chicago. And it got more intense after Mussolini came to power, and it was the socialists against the fascists. This continued into World War II, the World War II era, when the Sons of Italy and the Italo-American National Union, which were so pro-fascist before the war started, continued to be recognized by the American government as the true leaders of the Italian community, even though the anti-fascists, the socialists, had been opposed to Mussolini from square one. And so they were bitter. Even though there was some sort of coalition during World War II, the left wing was really jealous and mad that the ex-Mussolini supporters were still being deferred to by the American government. And so that's a part of it. Then Italian Americans, as they prospered, became a different class. In the early days, you would say Italian Americans were working class. But by the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Italian Americans prospered, and they became the business class, Republicans. And today, while Italian Americans in the 1930s might have voted for Roosevelt, in the 2008 election, damn few of them voted for Obama, voted Democrat. So there is that the political aspect, and I think also distrust. The politicians, and this is a broad statement, sweeping statement, Italian politicians in Chicago prior to 1960, almost all were connected with the mafia. I'm sorry. That's, I don't know if we want to call them the mafia, we'll call them the organized crime.
The outfit,
Yeah.
The outfit, or whatever you want to call it, okay? And so, I mean, really smart Italians didn't want to associate with them. And they were wary of anybody who emerged as a leader because they're all being supported by the outfit, and they're not really legitimate. So that's one of the things about the stereotype, and that is that we don't trust each other. Anybody who seems successful maybe is connected, and you don't want to put any faith in them. Or so there's that as well. Then, of course, there's the Americanization. You don't need to have your mutual benefit society anymore because you've got Social Security or you've got insurance that's much more valuable than those dumb things where you pay $3 every time anybody dies. So that's a part of it. And then the neighborhoods broke up, and the churches that bound people together during sometimes in Italian-American history in Chicago and elsewhere, those ties withered too. So those are all the strikes against us. Now, one of the things that held Italians together very closely in the post-World War II period was the Villa Scalabrini and support of the Villa Scalabrini. And Father Pirini, for 40, 50 years, made sure that every Italian-American organization sent some support to the Villa Scalabrini. In the 1990s, the Villa ran into financial problems, and since they had, at its inception, given the property in final terms to the Archdiocese took it back and gave it to another order, and the Scalabrinians were out at the Villa Scalabrini. And so all they have left is the name. And since then, where is the focus of Italian-American charity in Chicago? We want to make it the Casa Italia and have it become the Villa Scalabrini of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, where every Italian-American organization, individual really sends their money and their support and their attendance to the Casa Italia. But that's still something yet to be done. There are people who are jealous. The Casa Italia is just a scheme for the leaders to dominate or whatever, and they don't recognize me. And then there is that bella figura. Everybody wants to be honored and named and bowed to, and everybody wants to be the president of something, no matter how small. And so these are some of the things that keep us unlinked from each other. But
Lots of factors.
yeah, but the thing that can hold us together, though, is the culture, the understanding, and the we all like the Italian language. Who can argue against Dante? We had some people argue against us having a session tonight on anti-Italianism. One of the biggest supporters of the Casa Italia told me, "Oh, I'm so mad that you scheduled that."
Why?
Well, we don't want to have anything negative. We don't want to have anything negative. I said, well, we have to understand who we are, what our history is. That's what it's all about. And, then there's some organizations that are like that. They only want Italian-American organizations to do PR. Bella figura. all the, nonstop, 24/7, 65.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good, Fred.
Any questions?
That's pretty neat.
Here's a quick, on the question of apathy. It's a quick story from New Jersey. The disappearance, destruction, in some cases destruction of the old Italian neighborhoods in Newark and Patterson and Trenton is usually portrayed as a real tragedy of white ethnic flight, okay? For the suburbs farther out to which those Italians came, there's a very positive story to be told. That's a story of empowerment of Italian Americans. Those suburbs in New Jersey were being drained by rail lines to New York of all of their men in the 1960s. There weren't men to coach the Little Leagues anymore, people to serve on school boards, to be the police officers in the communities. And the Italians came out in town after town in New Jersey and took on those roles willingly, with real spirit, in a way that other ethnic groups, the Jews and the Greeks, did not when they came out to the suburbs. It was the Italians who found the structure of these old English boroughs and animated them with the spirit of the Italian commune. Now, how did they know how to do that? How could they fit in so naturally? And I think there the answer is, it lies in the regional associations, the small calabrese, pugliese clubs, the religious confraternities, where they learned how to raise money for this cause or to help that person who was sick. And it's not a story at all of apathy. It's a story of finding a place that can be told and needs to be told. And so politics in New Jersey has its problems with corruption, as does Chicago. But there's nothing particularly Italian about New Jersey's corruption.
Oh, one other thing about Italians in politics in Illinois and Chicago, and that is that the population has never been that high. It's been about 7% in Illinois, and it's double that in New Jersey.
Oh yeah, you have a critical mass of Italians of about 17 to 20% of the population.
Yeah. Another observation that a lot of people have made is that if you look at the list of mayors in the suburbs in Chicago, there are about 20 Italian Americans who are mayors of suburban towns. And they're not all heavily Italian towns. Some of them are black. And I don't know, maybe it's that sense of family or the ability to organize, based on being a member of a club of a couple hundred people, that you're able to get elected in a small unit, perhaps that, or maybe it's the pater familias tradition in Italian families, that a mayor is like the father of the town and takes responsibility for it, and they can see themselves doing it. And it's it's not a gigantic job like being president. It is possible to for a person to use their personality and to use their skills to be a competent mayor of a smaller community.
I have a question. You three gentlemen, do you think Mama and Papa had something to do with assimilation quickly in the American culture? And kind of stay away from the Italian culture?
Mama and Papa?
And Papa, you have to be this, you have to be that, you have to go to school, you have to do this. So there was a push, really, to assimilate.
Especially,
Mama and Papa.
especially during the period after World War II, or during World War II. You don't have to identify as an Italian. Just be American and avoid the heartaches that we've had for the last few years during the wartime.
I mean, growing up, you were told to. You have to be successful. You have to be
Yeah, I always felt that success was connected to my family and to my ethnicity, and I was afraid to fail because I didn't want to look bad. I guess that's my form of bella figura.
If you were male, not if you were female.
If you're a female, go cook. But not anymore, baby. There are Italian-American women are moving in the same trends that American women are. And there are more American women in the universities than there are men in the law schools, in the medical schools. And they got us beat. They are better students than us in the first grade, and they're better students than us in graduate school. But they can't do math.
It's not true. It's definitely not true.
Well, again, the books are for sale, and that's another thing, that we are middle class enough to be able to afford books. The time when we couldn't afford to buy books is over.
Thank you.
And we can all afford to buy books, $10, $20, $30. Hey, that's nothing. That's an investment. And when you buy a book, you support a writer, you support ideas. Ideas come from books. That's where, you know, that's the factory for ideas, and ideas make things happen, etc. That's how it goes. And so books are still important, although I do have an iPad. But final word, Fred?
No, just thanks to everybody for coming out, and look forward to having more of these. Hopefully I'll be there next time we do one of these. I miss Chicago very much, especially after.
Thank you.
While we have you, maybe we could get you to do something the evening of your UIC thing, and maybe it could be on endowed professors.
I'd be happy to. Whatever you need, you know, I'll be there.
He's got cards of all our failings. You know?